as an experimental scientist, an experiment that you can describe but never perform sounds perfect because you can write anything. And I'm probably going to go over time because I get yelled at, but I have to say that I've experienced a renegade recycler myself. We renovated our house over the summer, and at 5 o'clock on the Saturday morning that we had put some of the ceramics from our 3 bathrooms out, which is really foolish. Never renovate all of your bathrooms at one time. At 5 in the morning, I heard the sound of the toilets shattering behind my car in the driveway, and an Eastern European man on a bicycle was slowly demolishing each one of our toilets and taking all of the metal pieces out, leaving thousands of shattered shards, which not a black hole could not put back together, right under my tires. And when I went out to ask him at 5 in the morning, quite groggily, what he was doing, he was saying, recycling is good. And I said, so is cleaning up. I gave him a broom, and I stayed until he did. So we live in interesting times. This is long attributed to a Chinese curse, which is actually, when you do these kinds of talks and you are a little compulsive about it, you find out that it's actually falsely attributed to a Chinese curse. The false Chinese curse goes like this: may you live in interesting times, may you come to the attention of the authorities, and may you find what you're looking for. There's actually no Chinese translation of any of these things. But may we live in interesting times? Certainly we do. 2 to 3 weeks ago, you probably saw the newspaper articles that said, 60%, 70% of Canadians are not going to get the vaccine. They're afraid of it. A couple of children, unfortunately, tragically died, and now we've got huge lineups and estimates of 80 to 85% of the population of Canada suddenly want the vaccine now. So it's also interesting that even in a high wattage crowd like this, probably the only things you'll remember from a talk are 3. Several of the speakers have recognized that, and they've told you 3 things, and I've just blown it by telling you about the fake Chinese curse. So I have 2 things left that I can tell you will remember. So can I go backwards? Yes. Okay, so very quickly, I've done this every year since I came to McGill as a professor in 1990. I'm going to ask you to raise your hands at one point. Sorry, this is a little one of those motivational speaker tricks, but I've done it every year for the last 20. If vaccines are angel dust, they are perfect, they should be used in everybody all the time, that's a 10. If vaccines are tools of the devil, should never be used by anybody ever, that's a 0. I'm going to go from 0 up to 10. Please raise your hand when you reach the number that corresponds to your assessment of vaccines in general. 0. Good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, some of you may not have noticed that hands went up at 3. Okay? This is what's happened over the last 20 years at McGill. The yellow dots are McGill science students. The blue dots are McGill's Faculty of Medicine students. I would say that you were right about on the average. Non-scientifically, you came in at about a 7. There has been an absolutely massive loss of confidence in vaccines in the general and the scientific population over the last 20 years. This is tragic. And that some of you raise your hands at 3, I'd like you to leave now, please. 2005 was the first year that any student at McGill raised his or her hand at 5. But we now routinely have people raising their hands at between 3, 4, and 5. This is a potential disaster. Why is it a disaster? It's because vaccines work. This is a slide that shows you the highest numbers of cases in Canada during the worst year in the 20th century, and basically estimates of the annual incidence of these killing and maiming diseases now. These diseases have essentially, in the case of smallpox, literally disappeared, and in the case of these other diseases, they have largely disappeared. This is not a history without some problems. Obviously, smallpox. Smallpox was actually manufactured in pustules on the bellies of calves. And that took a little bit of guts to take that vaccine. In the Qatar incidents, polio was not completely inactivated. And a number of individuals got polio and a number of individuals died. The monkey cells that were used to grow polio, both the oral polio vaccine and the inactivated polio vaccine, were contaminated by a potently oncogenic virus for the first several years of manufacture called SV40. When you inject that virus into rodents, they all get tumors, and most of them die. Hundreds of millions of people, including yours truly, got those vaccines at the time, and we were just lucky that it was not as potently oncogenic in humans as it was in rodents. Occasional vaccine-associated paralysis, and of course a number of vaccines have been either introduced and then withdrawn from the market because of side effects, or were stopped just before they were released. So this is a history that is filled with problems and filled with near misses. But you cannot get away from the fact that we live under this umbrella of protection of vaccines. If I asked you now to raise your hand, how many people of you in the room have had a close personal friend who died from one of these diseases, there would be very few hands raised, unless you happen to come from a country where many of these diseases still circulate. Many anti-vaccination people say that this is nonsense, because these diseases were already disappearing as we were feeding people, giving people fresh water. But and to a certain extent, that's true. However, influenza B, meningitis, disappeared between the time that I was a medical student and when I was a resident, simply because we introduced a vaccine that worked. We figured out how to give a vaccine to very young children that allowed them to prevent this disease from happening again. So it comes down to a question of etymology. What does one actually mean when one says safe? Because you want your vaccines to be safe. Well, if you mean harmless, then no vaccine is safe. Absolutely. Admit it. If you mean prevention of something else that might be worse, then vaccines are, in fact, among the safest interventions that have ever been presented to man. 350 people die annually from bathtub-associated injuries. My 12-year-old son, in the preparation of this talk, he saw me preparing this talk, and he went, "Oh, okay, no more baths. I'll take the vaccine, but no way. I'm not getting into the bath." And the idiocy, the absolute lunacy of someone getting in their car on the West Island and driving to my vaccination clinic and telling me that it's too dangerous to give the vaccine to their child, and then getting in the car and driving back, is really beyond description. Okay. A much more sophisticated and complicated question is whether vaccines are safe enough. And in some cases, they're probably not. And this is situational. This is something we need to understand very carefully. Rabies vaccines are one of the only vaccines that have gone through a series of iterations where they were equally efficacious. The Pasteur vaccine that he made in the spinal cords of rabbits was in fact a very efficacious vaccine. It caused a demyelinating T-cell attack on the brain of 1 in 200 individuals. However, if I were bitten in the face by a rabid wolf today, I would still take that original Pasteur vaccine, because I've got a 100% chance of dying from rabies, and I've got a 1 in 200 chance of having a severe side effect. Okay? It's situational. That vaccine is absolutely not safe enough if a bat flew over your head. But if you've been bitten by a rabid animal, that is a vaccine that is acceptable. We've seen much more sophisticated vaccines developed in the last few years, but they were developed because they were safer, not because they were more efficacious. We have not seen a similar evolution with some of our other older vaccines. Similarly, smallpox is a very dangerous vaccine. It's estimated that there would be several thousand people hospitalized in Canada, and several hundred would die if we were to use that old smallpox vaccine again. It's not used. It hasn't been used since the early 1970s. But as soon as somebody very, very bad releases smallpox into the Canadian environment, that vaccine becomes safe again, relatively speaking. So when somebody says vaccines aren't safe, you need to challenge them on the etymology. And so my 3 things, and I'm going to push it. I'm going to get you to 4 things. Vaccines aren't perfect, but they're pretty damn close. And all risk is relative. The last bit of time, I'm going to talk to you about the 3rd thing. the history of vaccines. And it's a very interesting history because it's a history of intellectual leaps and then bursts of vaccines. So initially we had the observational biologists who used smallpox and actually virulent leishmania to create immunity for following infection. We then had the microbiologists who came in and they gave us several of our vaccines. So Pasteur with his germ theory, one germ equals one disease. That led to the development of vaccines that were simply killed organisms. Then we had the biochemists who came along and said, we've got the individual bacteria, now we can purify their toxins, now we can make this generation of vaccines. Then the cell biologists came in and they made egg-based vaccines just around the First World War. And then all of a sudden the immunologists and the molecular biologists came in after the Second World War, and we have this explosion of vaccines. Really an impressive explosion of vaccines. The molecular age dawned with the first truly recombinant hepatitis B vaccine in the late 1980s. We are poised now in the early 2000s for the next massive burst of vaccines. And not just vaccines for infectious diseases, although we still need some, obviously, for things like TB, malaria, and HIV. We can target more organisms. We can target organisms like dengue, like malaria. We can actually target diseases that already exist. There are vaccines that are ready to cure people from hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and presumably one day HIV. Completely new uses of vaccines. Many, many labs, thousands of labs around the world are working on cancer vaccines, vaccines against autoimmunity. And we can already use a vaccine to sterilize animals, and several of these vaccines have actually been tried in people. Permanent sterility is no problem. Reversible is a bit of a problem. These new uses of vaccines, well, if you want to have kids at some point, you don't want to use this vaccine. So we're now poised, because of the new immunology and the new molecular biology, to move from this paradigm of simple vaccines, taking attenuated organisms, taking nasty organisms and killing them, and giving them here to my rather surprised-looking third child, or taking bits and pieces of them as the biochemists did. These are the old vaccines. The new vaccines now are legion. Up until now, we've usually had only one type of vaccine. Measles vaccine has been the same ever since we invented it in the 1950s. By the end of this year, possibly next year, we will have at least 10 different kinds of influenza vaccine alone to choose from. Not all of them will be licensed in Canada, but we will have many, many different influenza vaccines simply because of the interest in influenza right now, but also because of the advances in science. And so suddenly, my little kids and your little kids are going to be subjected to many vaccines, not just the dozen or two that they're subjected to now, but there's going to be enormous pressure to vaccinate against a very, very wide range of things. Okay. Furthermore, a number of other things have happened. One is you've had large foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation say, look, vaccines are important, guys. You've got to make some new ones. And all of a sudden, some of the big pharmaceutical companies have found religion. And although Lehman Brothers didn't get everything quite right, they predicted that vaccines would grow 18% versus the pharmaceutical industry's average of 4% over the next several years. And they seem to be bang on. They're gone, but they were bang on. This philanthropic drive, this profit-motive drive, will see dozens of new vaccines enter the market in the coming years. So we need to be prepared for many new vaccines. It means we need to be prepared to communicate risk-benefit ratios. These are the things that I hear every day. Children get too many shots. Vaccines don't work. Vaccines are not necessary. They're not safe. Blah, 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 blah. Tools of genocide. Vaccines. Really. These last ones are a little easier to deal with, actually. But if you go to the internet, you will see these things again and again and again. And if a parent who wants to do the best for his or her child goes to the internet and types in vaccine information, this is what they see. 90% of the stuff on the net about vaccines is this stuff. It's not our stuff. Okay? And repetition, no matter how slick and sophisticated, doesn't transform something from a lie into a truth. We live under an umbrella, as I said, of vaccine-induced protection. Where I work in Zimbabwe, where I work in Peru, Senegal, there aren't poor people saying, now tell me about this vaccine again. Am I going to get just a sore arm, or is my child going to get autism? They say, can I have the vaccine? We live under this this safety umbrella. And so, in fact, what you saw in real time over the last 2 weeks is exactly what's happened. Just before SARS, I was sitting on a committee with some Public Health Agency of Canada people, and they were going, you know what we really need to motivate Canadians to pay attention to public health is we need a really good epidemic where a couple of people die. And about two weeks later, SARS came out of Hong Kong. By the way, the favorite ad that I saw was the very badly timed Hong Kong ad, which was a picture of the city. It was released, actually, just before SARS outbreak broke out in Hong Kong. And it was, Hong Kong takes your breath away. So I sent a little email to my friend. Are you happy now? But we've seen it in real time, right? 2 weeks ago, 60%, 80% of people said, no way, I'm not taking the vaccine, not safe enough. 2 weeks later, a couple of children dead, and all of a sudden now everybody wants the vaccine. So who are these people? Okay, well, clearly there are some who are truly injured. There are parents and relatives who are truly injured. These are terribly difficult situations to deal with because it's true. Some vaccines hurt people. They are not 100% safe. And then there are those who believe they were injured, the parents, and then very importantly, the lawyers. They're not all bad, just the 95% who make the rest look good, look bad. A small number of very committed lawyers. There's particularly the U.S. vaccine compensation program that allows these people to have a free meal ticket, and they specialize in pursuing vaccine adverse events. And then there are medical experts who've done the same thing. They do nothing but earn dollars testifying in these counts. Then there's the paranoid group, the anybody but government crowd, the crunchy granola crowd. And this, my favorite, which is actually what a lot of people said, is if 102 billion Chinese do it, it must be okay. And that's empirical science, right? A lot of people have said, I want the vaccine, but I'd like a few million people to get it before I get it. There's some serious philosophy. There's some serious thought behind this, because a lot of parents will tell you, if I give my child the vaccine and my child has a serious adverse event, I couldn't live with myself. If, on the other hand, that's an error of commission. If, on the other hand, I don't give my child the vaccine and I take the chances with the natural disease, which is way more dangerous than the vaccine, and the child gets sick, well, that's the fate of God. That's Allah's will. That's whatever you want. But it's an act of omission. And philosophically, that's much easier for many, many people and legal systems to deal with. For example, the famous trolley argument is the lesser evil, where you're the trolley driver and you have a choice to make because your trolley is going to go down one track and kill one person, or the other track and kill 6 people. Which do you choose? And many people would say, I can't choose. The trolley will go where it should. Okay. This is essentially the same thing with vaccine programs. Think about it. What we are indulged in this week is the largest human experiment ever conducted. Right? We are vaccinating the entire population of the world with a new product that up until a week ago had been tested in a total of, for example, 51 babies and less than 1,000 people. Right? And we are vaccinating the world with this product. In fact, every public health vaccination program beats the preceding record for human experimentation. So they are very, very big ideas. It is our responsibility, obviously, because we know that these programs are going to cause harm. They will do great good, but they will cause harm. It's stunning that there are only 2 organized compensation programs in the world. The Quebec has a collegial, consensus-based, expert opinion vaccine injury compensation program where decide if there's causality associated with a certain vaccine. The U.S. has special courts with special masters, so-called table injuries that are known to be caused by the vaccine. This whole system is increasingly confrontational, and the numbers here are stunning. The MMR thimerosal autism case, class action suit in the United States, which is still up in the air, is a $15.7 billion lawsuit. Okay, these numbers are not small. What happens to everybody else who doesn't happen to live in a province or a country where there's a vaccine injury compensation program? Well, you're up against the big guys. You basically have to sue the company. Okay? These are companies that have essentially total revenues that are between $30 and $45 billion. This is the same size as the gross domestic product of countries like Costa Rica and Nicaragua. Okay, so in fact, it is our responsibility internationally to make these compensation programs available to everybody. We're very fortunate. We're the only Canadian province that has such a compensation program. The U.S. system, and to some extent, the Canadian legal system has this problem. Because there is this specialized cadre of lawyers that are growing into this niche of providing specialized expertise, both legal and medical and scientific, for these vaccine compensation programs. This is my second fraudulently associated quotation. So this was Mark Twain falsely attributed to Benjamin Disraeli. It was probably a quote actually from Sir Charles Dyke talking about unions. And in fact, more recently it's been quoted here in the Economic Journal. There are three kinds of unreliable witnesses: a liar, a damn liar, and an expert. But I have certainly been in court cases where I'm testifying for the government or the plaintiffs, and I have been faced with people who will basically say anything. There are many, many lawyers and experts who earn $250,000, $500,000, $750,000 a year doing nothing but testifying in these cases. And we need to find a way to deal with this. So what's the ideal vaccine? Well, here's the wish list. Inexpensive, single dose, blah, 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 and 100% safe. We don't have a single product that achieves this. We never will have a product that will achieve this. But what you need to know is that many of our current products come awfully close to meeting this ideal. There's every reason to expect that as we move into the next generation of vaccines, that they will be at least as complicated as the ones that we've dealt with today. There will be errors. There will be problems. We have to figure out a way to communicate, because every time there's a newspaper article for any vaccine, this is what you get. Yada, 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 vaccine, blah, yada, yada, stuff like that. And the only thing people remember this is our communication task. So, is progress inevitable? Are we marching forward towards a brand new world, brave new world, where everybody will be protected from everything? Not if we don't communicate correctly. Very quickly, polio was eradicated in the Americas in 1992, in the Mediterranean, Southern African region, then China, Southeast Asia. Then in 2004, we were down to essentially 7 countries that had endemic polio. And then in the very hyperpolarized world created, unfortunately, by the administration south of the border, the imams of northern Nigeria said there is a plot to sterilize Muslim boys by giving them the polio vaccine. Do not vaccinate your children. And this is what we saw. We saw polio spread from those 7 countries to at least another 17, maybe as many as 34 in the ensuing 2 to 3 years. We have set the polio eradication effort back at least a decade because of a communications error. So progress is not inevitable. So here are the 3 things. Vaccines aren't perfect, but they're pretty damn good. All risk is relative, and the anti-vaccination movement is here to stay. We have to get used to it, and we have to learn how to communicate with it. So we need to make vaccines as safe as they can be. That might be making new vaccines for old diseases. We have to acknowledge their shortcomings publicly and not stonewall anybody. And we have to meet passion with passion, plus science on our side. Thanks very much.